Good morning to everybody, and buenos dias, good morning, guten Morgen, bonjour, so jó reggelt in Hungarian. By the way, yeah, we are together again like almost a family, yeah? But some people are a little bit more reserved, they are in the background, yeah, but you can come closer, like in the Holy Mass all the time, this is the challenge, yeah. Welcome to the third session. And we have a busy morning time with the distinguished guests. And our title is today the following: the influence of religion in the society. And I think it is a fascinating title, and we try to examine together the evolving relationship between politics and religion in Europe, but honestly in the wide meaning. The politic is not the party politic, is not the European politic or the national politic, but is the public politic. Yeah, I think that is very controversial forming of wording. At the same time, we can also observe the natural need of the people for something spiritual, and in Europe is a classical form is mostly any kind of form of spirituality excluded from the public life. We see that in the European Parliament, and we see that, for example, that some of our colleagues they are really deep believers, and they are not able to participate in the European prayer breakfast tomorrow. In this country, it is absolutely unacceptable to participate in it. There are phenomenal questions and phenomenal challenges for people, for other colleagues, for other parts of Europe. Today is the main narrative of political life is really the secular one. We as the Christian Democrat politicians, we must act in the generally secular political field. This is absolutely clear. And it remains important to use the own vocabulary is a Christian-based language. At the same time, I'm sure that the politics be familiar with the character of the different religion, respectively. And I think here is for us today. We try to really on the same ground to try to speculate. And maybe we have some result and messages. How can we deal about for different kind of perspective, different kind of religion? How can we deal with this phenomenon? Influence of religion. It can be a question remark. How is the situation today? The churches and the public life together. First. We have, as you see, a really great list of speakers. And of course, the temptation is all the time there to be long, but I think it's in the morning time still under control. And I think we can give after the speeches, so 8 to 10 minutes, we can give the floor for the audience for the debate. It was so successful yesterday. First of all, the Father Jacon d'Esteville, who is a Dominican father with us, director of the Institute for Economical Studies of the Pontifical University St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome. Father, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Olbrycht, for your introduction. And thank you for the invitation to this gathering. It's really a unique opportunity not only to reflect together, but to meet and to engage in dialogue. I am here on behalf of the Institute for Ecumenical Studies of the Pontifical University Angelicum, but my main work is actually at the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity. As you know, this dicastery is responsible for the ecumenical dialogue on behalf of the Holy See since Vatican II, and is promoting and sponsoring some 20 dialogues, bilateral dialogues with almost all Christian denominations, and also with Judaism in the context of a specific commission. I will speak in French. Le titre de cette session.
The title of this session, The Influence of Religion in Society, would deserve us thinking about the jargon and the terms used. What do we mean when we say religion? Is it a sentiment of belonging, or to the contrary, is it believing without belonging, as it is sometimes defined? Are we talking about diffuse feeling of religion? Are we talking about religious institutions? What do we mean by religious leader? That's the first question. The second question is, what do we mean when we say society? Are we talking about public opinion, about the state, what we call civil society? And what do we mean when we say influence? Is this public opinion? Is it a cultural context? Is it psychological conditioning? Is it social status? Is it soft power? Or is it lobbying? Or religion's just one other influencer among other influencers? So I think it is worth delving into this, and you can look at this from different points of view, sociological point of view, philosophical point of view, and theological point of view. Now, of course, in 10 minutes, I'm not setting myself the goal of answering all these questions, but I would like to talk about some general statements and general situations we're all aware of, and then I would like to make some distinctions from an ecumenical point of view, because that is what I specialize in. So I'm talking about the dialogue between Christians. So some general facts. Since the beginning of Christianity up to the middle of the 20th century, the dominant culture in Europe was Christian, and the dominant culture in the church was European. So for centuries, Christianity and European culture were so inextricably linked that we could have thought that they were the same. And nowadays, as we know, Christianity is the dominant religion in the European population, because 3/4 of Europeans consider themselves to be Christian. But we're witnessing two parallel developments. First of all, Christianity is becoming less and less European, and Europe is becoming less and less Christian. This might seem glaringly obvious. Now, Christianity is becoming less and less European. Only 1/4 of Christians live in Europe, as opposed to 2/3 a century ago. Now, this trend of becoming less European depends on the denomination, so it varies. Let us look at the Catholic Church. It's the most affected. European Catholics account for less than 1/4 of the global Catholic population. And who was elected Pope also illustrates this. And this is even more true for European Protestants that only account for 10% of the Protestant population around the world. However, when it comes to the Orthodox Church, it is vastly European, because 3/4 of Orthodox people around the world live in Europe. So Christianity is less and less European, but this isn't because Islam has made inroads into Europe, even though Islam has grown since the 1960s. But it is because of the fact that we have a higher number of people who say that they don't have any denomination, which doesn't mean that they're atheist, but they actually account for 20% of the EU population. So this is what we find these two situations. And the corollary is that the relation between Christianity and culture in Europe has changed. So we have two contradictory processes unfolding. On the one hand, we have this disconnect between Christianity and culture, and on the other, unlike what I just said, we have Christianity being boiled down to a cultural phenomenon. Now, the first point I would like to talk about is this fracture between Christianity and the Western European culture. For the first time, the Church is experiencing a disconnect, a historical disconnect, with the dominant culture that was its own for centuries. And we could describe this with the term secularization. And some sociologists actually call this exculturation, the exculturation of Christianity. The French philosopher Marcel Gauchet, which some of you might have heard, wrote a famous book, at least well known in France, called The Disenchantment of the World. And in this book, he explains that Christianity is the religion to exit religion. This means that Christianity is a religion that potentially contains the dynamic of secularization in itself. Now, this doesn't mean that society is no longer Christian, at least not when it comes to its founding values and concepts, but it means that religion no longer provides the structure for society. So according to this thesis, secularization isn't tantamount to de-Christianization, but paradoxically, it stems from Christianity, but a secular Christianity. So this fracture seems to be linked to something broader that doesn't just affect Christianity, but all religions. We have a sociologist called Olivier Roy, who wrote a book called Holy Ignorance. And in this book, he talked about the appearance of pure religion or religion without culture. So this recent development would favor or promote the spreading of certain types of religion without a cultural anchor, such as evangelists or Salafists who put forward elements that can become universal, that are purely spiritual, and that are not connected to specific languages and traditions. So this rupture between Christianity and European culture would stem more to this disconnect between religion and culture in general around the world. But paradoxically, we also witness the opposite, and that is that faith is being boiled down to culture. In Western countries, we call these cultural Christians, and that is compared or in contrast to worship or religion-based Christians, those who have received a Christian education and who say that they have kept these founding values. We all are aware of the case Lauzi against Italy in 2009 that illustrates how this culturalization of religion. I'm referring to the case that referred to putting crosses in school classes. The Italian state's lawyers said that the crucifix, the cross, was part and parcel of Italian culture. And one can also look at relations between Christianity and Islam. We don't know whether the words Christian or Muslim define a belief or a cultural identity. Muslim extremism is happy to identify the words West and Christianity, the words West with Christianity, while in the West the term Muslim, sometimes in everyday language, is used to describe Arab immigrants. Now, so I have put forward these general points, but it would be very important to fine-tune all of this and look at the details and the differences between different European countries, especially the differences between Western Europe and Central and Eastern Europe. In the West, not only do we have to distinguish between secularization and de-Christianization, but also between secularization and laicism. In societies such as the British society or in Denmark, their societies are deeply secular, but they don't have a secular state. In other words, a religion isn't the church isn't separate from the state. And in fact, the churches often have a legal and social status that is privileged and which doesn't exist outside Europe. But there are also secular societies, but that are deeply religious, such as Italy, or if we look outside Europe, the US. It's also very important to look at what we call French secularism, which is not always well understood. In 1905, a law was adopted that split the state from the church, and it also looked at how worship and religion was organized in the public sphere. And at the moment, it is seen as religion being privatized, if you like, or religion just being confined to the private sphere. And so laicism is becoming an ideology which wants to exclude religion from the public sphere, which wasn't the aim of the 1905 Act. I would also like to mention Olivier Roy at this point, again saying that a secularized society that is striving to find values and that banishes religion will just play into the hands of fundamentalists and become their victim. And that the problem in Europe at the moment is to promote not just the expulsion of religion from the private sphere, but on the contrary, it should be putting religion back into culture and society. Now, I have one last point. The founding members of the EU were of a Catholic and Protestant religion, but then later we got new member states that were mostly Orthodox. And so they had different relations between the state and the church and society. In many of these countries, especially those from the former Soviet Union and the former Yugoslavia, so the state churches appeared after independence, and so therefore the authorities didn't shy away from meddling in religious affairs to set up local churches and state churches that were seen as identifying with, corresponding with national identity. So in parallel to this process of nationalization, these countries also had to deal with the whole issue of relations between the state and the church. And this wasn't easy because in the past it had been different, and they also had to deal with issues such as giving back confiscated assets that had been seized during the communist times, the teaching of religion in school, or even having chaplains in the armies and hospitals. And of course there's the issue of the Byzantine churches as well, where they had to grapple with being torn between wanting freedom and the Byzantine or traditional Byzantine ideal of the symphony of powers. Then we had the fall of the Iron Curtain, which allowed us to have contacts between two spiritual and cultural universes in Europe, from the Atlantic to the Urals, as General de Gaulle said, allowing for us to breathe with two lungs, to use the expression of John Paul II. Now, there is this split between the East and the West, but I feel we haven't sufficiently taken into account the clout of religion. And this is going to be my second thesis, if you like. So the believers from Eastern Europe believe that secularization discredits Western Christianity because they want because they feel that traditional religion allowed them to resist state atheism. the churches in these countries felt that by joining the union, their cultural identity was diluted in materialist Europe. So we're talking about conservative ecumenism, and this kind of ecumenical approach is Eurosceptic. And they feel that this was imposed on them by the West that didn't recognize their identity and their specific culture. So they felt that they were integrated but not included. I know that I have had to go through this very quickly, but I would like to tell you that when I look at the title of the session, two ideas spring to mind. It's about putting religion back into society instead of banishing it, but also when it comes to the European project, we should better take into account religion in all its diversity and also the specific elements linked to Eastern Christianity. Thank you.
Father Desreville, many thanks. That's for this very analytic speech, and I think you raised in the audience a lot of questions, but we are still under control, timely, and for this reason I take under control myself as well. Yeah, I have many questions to you, and I would give the floor to one of the, how would you say, most traditional partner, Rabbi Levi Matusov, and Willy Levi it was a partner in the most difficult time, maybe less complex time. And Levi, I am really personally very happy about that you are with us, and I'm really interesting to know about what you think about this kind of issue. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Olbrycht. First, allow me a word of thanks and gratitude to the EPP Group, and especially to the team of Interreligious Dialogue, and it's the opportunity to express profound gratitude to you, Mr. Jan Olbrycht, for your 20 years of involvement and activities in maintaining this dialogue as a co-chair together with George in order to enhance it. And words of thanks to Mrs. Laskava, the director, as well to the entire team, Attila, Gabor, Nora, and I see here also some previous persons involved, such as Paolo Licandro, and I recall also Stefan Biller, who really took this dialogue to the dimension where we are today. 25 years of dialogue. In Judaism, each number has a significance, a numerical value. 25 in the Talmud, it's ko tevarechu, so it will be blessed. So it's really a blessed gathering, and it gives us strength and encouragement for the continuation. We are in Santiago. Words of thanks to Mr. Milan Mon for hosting us, and everybody speaks about the Camino, the walk. So I would like to, in these few minutes which are allocated to me, to take you through a path. Let's take a little walk together and try to see where we come from, where we stand, and where we go to. Every year I take my family for a trip of European values. We try to discover a region with Jewish roots. As you know, Europe is based on the Judeo-Christian values, and we have strong European roots. This past summer, my daughters, who are teenagers, choose to visit Spain. So we traveled over 3,000 kilometers, starting from Girona, going down south and coming back up to visit the cultural, Jewish, historical places of Spain, and of course to understand the culture and traditions of Spain as well. It's the first time that I'm here. We did not make it all the way to Galicia, and it's a real pleasure to be here. As we were walking, my girls were mostly running. And for them, it was not so much the walk, but it was about the stories or the TikToks or the selfies that they were taking in order to post them. This was for them a very important part of the trip, which still remains with them. In today's day and age, the biggest challenges are where we are facing with social media. And this social media are influencing our societies and influencing our thoughts, are influencing our speech, are influencing our actions. What we take from there, what we see, we have to, of course, have the wisdom in order to differentiate and to know where are the sources of it. And, of course, with one image, we could project a total different change of what really happens in for real. And it's, of course, I should start by remembering the 7th of October, where many of you have seen images. Many of members of European Parliament have visited Israel and see the atrocities that took place in Kfar Be'eri, in Sderot, and in the south. And I thank most of the members of European Parliament, the declarations of the European Parliament, and especially from your group, which have strongly condemned the terrorist act of Hamas, and condemning very strongly the Islam radical, which is rising as well here in Europe. We are facing anti-Semitism. It has been mentioned yesterday by my colleague about the safety and security of our citizens, of our children. Yes, you could see I walk around here I am with my hat, as you see in the European Parliament, with my traditional, not hiding my Judaism, and this is everywhere. Jews today in Europe should be able to live safely and securely. One of the ways in order to reach that is by education, by getting to know each other. And this is what the importance of this dialogue, the 25th dialogue. I recall when it started, it was actually the EPP dialogue with the Orthodox Church. And it took a long way until other religions were included. A long way, I should say, because of consciences, because of maybe other political constraints. But the consensus was very clear that everyone has to be involved. My first visit was in Istanbul, I recall, in October 2004, with the Ecumenical Patriarch, which was the first ones that were involved in this dialogue, and then included. And wanting to understand the traditions of the other, the cultures of the other, the necessities, the challenges. What are the main challenges for the Jewish community? Well, in every aspect, I should say, or to use your terminology, in every committee of the European Parliament, something could be. Take it environment or agriculture, which is the issue of eating kosher, the ritual slaughtering, shchita, which is being challenged by many today in European societies. Take it the freedom of expression of religion, we call it garment. Of course, in foreign affairs, we have it. In health care, the continuation, where does life start, where does life end? We spoke yesterday about birth control as well. So all these are really the real issues where, by understanding the traditions and the interest to understand the traditions of the others, we could bring it to resolve. I address you today not as a rabbi, but as a fellow European citizen. Because when religious leaders speak, often they tend to preach. As a fellow European citizens, which we share common European values, and of course we have in the Article 17 in the treaty, as was mentioned yesterday by Vice President Karas, the open, transparent, and regular dialogue, it is an importance to have it. But not just as a religion, as a fellow citizens, as others, as Europeans that elect and that vote. You know, it was once told, rabbis like to say stories also. And it was a man that was walking out of synagogue, and he's running. And the rabbi asks him, "Where are you running to?" He says, "Well, I'm running for my livelihood. I'm running for, as we say in French, my gagne-pain. And I'm in a rush." Rabbi looks at him and says, "Are you sure you're in the right direction? Maybe it's the other way and you're actually running away from it." When we are walking, and in the direction where we are going, which path are we walking? We are walking, well, most of the paths today are already paved by our ancestors. The saying says, "Tous les chemins mènent à Rome," all paths lead to Rome. Today, maybe all paths lead to Brussels, all paths come from Brussels. But which one are we choosing to walk? Are we choosing the one to walk which gives us space for the other, understanding for the other? Or others perhaps, unfortunately, choose the narrow ways which don't just look at themselves. It has been mentioned, we are approaching, it's the last dialogue before the European elections, and the risk is too often when the politicians, before they get elected, they tend to look behind to see where the people want them to lead, and then they would walk in the front. But looking behind, Moses, the first leader of Judaism, the first one that has taken to 3,335 years ago, that split the sea and walks us to the path in going out of the Exodus from Egypt, bringing us to the Holy Land, to Israel, the eternal land of the Jewish people. Well, he was being very many times challenged for his leadership. Still, he was leading, walking forward, showing the way. And this is our role as leaders, to show the way, to connect, to bound, to bring peace and coexistence. Yes, but to accept also, at the same time, the ideas of each other and to understand each other. Finally, education, always the key of our path to understand the other. We are approaching in just over 48 hours on Thursday evening, we'll start the Jewish holiday of Chanukah. Many of you know, it's been over 20 years, it's been celebrated in the European institutions, by the different organizations in Brussels and in Strasbourg. The Chanukah, the menorah, the candelabra, has 8 branches and a root, which is really the symbol of Europe, unity in diversity. We have a common circle that all brings us together, and each adds to their light, to their shining. In fact, there will be a celebration. There are many celebrations in Brussels, and there will be on Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock in Strasbourg, as every year, the lighting of the menorah with a cocktail, and I take this opportunity to invite you all to join, and the invitations are on the way, to share this light together, and to, something very important in Judaism is the food, the traditional food, because that's also something that connects us. There will be the traditional foods, and on each holiday, we have it when together with our Muslim friends at the occasion of Iftar and others, to share the meal together, to share to share a dinner together, to break the bread together. But when we bring together something that finds us common roots, and then from there we grow in our dialogue, we will be successful. Thank you very much again for bringing us together, and it should be a continuous success to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Levi Matuzov. Thank you, Levi. Don't worry. That is, if you have a message and really preach together, it's not a problem. Yeah, that is. It was a clear wording. And we know it, and was already missing this kind of style of you. Many thanks. Many thanks. I turn to our next panelist, Mr. Timo. I touch Güzel Mansour. Yeah, it's already, the name has a big message. Yeah, and Mr. Güzel Mansour is General Director of the Department of the German Bishops' Conference for the Dialogue with Muslims and Research about Islam in Germany, SIBEDO. That's typical, very German name, the SIBEDO. We know already a little bit about. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Vielen Dank, Herr Olbrycht. Danke für die Einladung.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Olbrycht. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here. It's the third time, actually, that I take part in a meeting like this. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here. Yesterday we talked about interreligious dialogue and the meaning of interreligious dialogue, and Jan Olbrycht said that dialogue requires spaces where people can come together. And you've been doing this for 25 years now. You've been finding a space where we can meet and hold discussions. I mean, dialogue also needs, as well as space, needs to be topical. It needs to stick to the subject. And I'm pleased that we're seeing some of that. I mean, we're sticking to the subject and really dealing with thorny issues. And it's good. It's an open process. And it's great that we can provide input, we can have an influence, but then obviously it's no longer in our hands what's done with that input. It's up to those who receive the input, what they do with it. And allow me also to make a further comment. We're in Santiago de Compostela, we're talking about interreligious dialogue, and we're also trying to break down walls. So I don't know whether this is the best place to be breaking down walls in Santiago, but perhaps that's another issue. But anyway, you have found a space which we can use to hold inter-religious dialogue, and I'm very grateful that that's the case. So the influence of religion in society, that's the theme of this session. Now obviously I am familiar with the German context, and also I have roots outside Europe, but I have found a home in Germany. So given that, I have different experiences with this issue, different points of view, but I'm going to try and be very practical. I'm going to try and look at the situation in Germany and give a few examples. And let me begin with a negative point so that I can end on an optimistic note. Now, since October the 7th, it's once again become clear how religions bring conflicts into society. I mean, the Middle East conflict isn't really a religious conflict per se. I mean, the ambassador yesterday said that expressly, as did the imam. Other speakers also mentioned that aspect very clearly. So it's not a religious conflict, it's more about the distribution of land between Palestinians and Israelis. But here, and unfortunately this is often the case, religious narratives and motives transferred to the conflict and used to legitimize violence. We're currently experiencing this in the troubled region itself, but also in European societies. In Germany, violence is sometimes legitimized by religion, religious voices reinforce stereotypes, anti-Semitism, etc. But, and this is important to emphasize, there are also religious voices opposing those narratives and calling for peacefulness from the same tradition. They deconstruct the false motives and narratives from their own religion, and religions are therefore often also part of the solution to these problems, even though they're not necessarily primarily issues that are religious in nature. They're just legitimized and promoted by religious narratives. So it's therefore, in my view, important that citizens find immunity against false religious manipulation. And this means that they have to be mature, they have to use reason, and they also have to be well versed in their own religious tradition, if they see themselves as religious, The relationship between the state and religious communities is always a balancing act, because the state doesn't want to be taken over to a too great extent by religion, if it sees itself as secular in some way. But on the other side of the coin, a religious community can't allow itself to be taken over by the state for state purposes. Nevertheless, there can be a very productive interplay between the two. In Germany, the relationship between state and religion is very complex, and it's one that's grown through the shared history of churches and different forms of government. It's obviously not a perfect system, but I think it currently offers many opportunities for mutual enrichment. Let me give you one example that can illustrate this maturity. And as that example, I would mention religious education. In Germany, this is offered to pupils even at state schools. Although the condition is that enough students have to come together for the lessons, and they have to belong to a religious community that meets the criteria for cooperation. Now, in the past, this only applied to Protestant and Catholic churches. For pupils of other religious communities, there were alternative lessons depending on the federal state they lived in, and these lessons were mainly ethical in nature. They generally looked at philosophy, etc. But for some years now, there have also been in Hesse, North Rhine-Westphalia and Bavaria, for example, Muslim religious education classes. And like Christian religious education, this is not just about teaching religious content, but about religious competence. Students reflect on their own values and ideas, and they learn both to consolidate their faith and to take a critical look at it. It goes without saying that these lessons aren't aimed at fighting religious extremism or generating loyalty to the state, because they'd be called something different if they were. However, as a byproduct, religious education does help to combat the above-mentioned dangers of religious influence by arming young people against false rhetoric and enabling them to deal with their religion in a self-confident and reflective manner. This also arms them against religiously motivated restrictions on freedom and behaviour that goes against the constitution. It's a good thing that the German state is cooperating with religious communities here, because both benefit from religious education in schools. I mean, the cooperation is actually more complex than I've set out here, and it also varies in each German state. I'm not going to go into too many details here, as I'd rather develop other perspectives. However, it is important to point out another form of cooperation in the German context. A few days ago, the German Islamic conference met again. This is a meeting that the Ministry of the Interior has been organising for 17 years. In 2006, and also during subsequent years, the main focus was on security issues. But more recently, the perspective has broadened, and more recently, the focus has been on religious education in schools, Islamic welfare, pastoral care in prisons and in the military, the problem of imams sent by other states, and most recently, hostility towards Muslims. These are important issues, and they need to be discussed properly and publicly so that solutions can be implemented. I think this shows the strength of the German system, which is not completely secular, and is therefore able to establish cooperation and initiatives such as the German Islam Conference, and it's currently addressing issues of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. But the relationship between society and religions is not limited to attempts to find solutions for the negative influences of religion. I mean, if that were the case, the relationship between religion and society would simply be negative, and it would basically try to limit the influence of religion as much as possible. But that's not even remotely the case. If you look at any city in the world, you can see how much religions have given to society. Churches, mosques, synagogues, temples. Everywhere, religions give society places that create community. They enable regular meetings and cohesion. In addition, they create a moral code that drives them to do good in society. Just think of Caritas, Diakonie, the German social welfare organization, the Red Cross or the Red Crescent. And there are many others. In many ways, religions complement the state. Wolfgang Birkenförder once said in what became known as the Birkenförder dictum, and I quote, "The liberal secularized state lives from conditions that it cannot guarantee itself." The modern liberal state gives freedom, but at the same time it has to hope that citizens themselves will regulate it morally, because the state can only intervene to a liberal extent. Otherwise it might become totalitarian. So this is where religion and society complement each other. I mean, the state and society would lack something without religious communities, and that fact can also be seen, for example, during disasters. Prayers are inconceivable without religions and religious services, but also increasingly multi-faith prayers for victims, for peace, and much more. And that gives society strength and also creates cohesion that society simply can't achieve without religions. In addition, religions give a lot to society culturally and intellectually. Religions are an integral part of society. I can't even list all the artistic contributions of religion. The history of art and music cannot be written without them. But you don't only have to look to the past. Even today in cities like Berlin or even Santiago, it's clear how much different religious communities have helped to shape urban societies. They're very visible on the streets. And it makes societies more colourful, diverse and more vibrant. In Germany, the cultural intellectual scene is shaped by religious communities through academies, among other things. In almost every major city in Germany, there's a Catholic and a Protestant academy, and they provide impetus for urban society as a whole with a varied program. Gradually, Islamic academies are also emerging, for example, in Heidelberg and Berlin. The buildings haven't been built yet in all cases, but these academies are already providing important impulses through organized events. In Frankfurt, there's a Jewish academy being established, which will have an impact on urban society with its own program. So this means and shows that religious communities are not just observers of social developments, but are actively involved in them. And this seems to me to be crucial for vibrant democracy. We have necessary debates on important ethical issues, such as euthanasia, dealing with new technologies such as AI, biotechnology, etc. And these debates thrive on arguments and exchange. And here, it's a good thing if religious communities can contribute their expertise to the discourse and, if necessary, act as a critical corrective influence. I was only able to mention a few points here in the German context, but I look forward to further discussions with you, and then maybe I'll have the opportunity to mention further aspects. So thank you very much.
Dankeschön, Herr Güsels-Mansour. Und natürlich.
Thank you very much. I think clearly we're going to have to talk about education in our next meeting. That's pretty clear, I think. And perhaps our next panelist will also foster that idea. This is Father Friedrich Bekina.
Of the Congregation of the Catholic Education. Father Friedrich Bekina should be with us online, yeah? I hope today it will be easier. Yes. Father, we are happy to see you and we are happy to hear you. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, the hosts and organizers of this meeting. I was fully enthusiastic to come to Santiago de Compostela when I was invited some weeks ago. And then I booked my flight and I mentioned this to my friends, and they said to me, "Oh, Santiago de Compostela, you should not take a plane, you should walk." When on last Sunday I was sitting at the airport in Munich, stuck and listening to the announcements, I thought it would have been better to walk to Santiago. Probably then I would have had a chance to be with you physically also today. But let us take this experience also as a symbol for what I want to share with you in the next minutes. It's a symbol for sometimes we are waiting for a quick and easy solution, like I was waiting for the plan and did not take the next modest and little step, which probably would have put us in a better condition or would have helped us to begin a way which is a longer way and not an easy solution. And I think this is also true for what we are all aiming at this conference. And I want to really thank not only for the conference, but for the good work that is being done and continues to be done by many politicians of the parties here present, many of whom would identify with Christian democratic parties. And calling a party Christian democratic does not mean to mixing religion with politics and thus creating an insane confusion. It rather expresses, and this is also to my own experience during my career in working in higher education policy, the conviction of men and women who as politicians want to do their jobs not in a religious vacuum and based on their own religious illiteracy and indifference. On the contrary, throughout my career, I had to deal with many people who, based on their respect and knowledge with regard to religions, their tradition, the wisdom and values, they demonstrated the possibility and willingness to engage in a fruitful dialogue with religions and their leaders and representatives for the benefit of society. And I think we all are convinced that a precondition of a good and fruitful dialogue is the awareness of one's own identity and the possibility to be transparent about this. And this appreciation for the work that has been done for 25 years and is continuing to be done brings me to the topic of this session, the influence, or let me say the contribution of religion in society. When in 2005 I started my career in working for international higher education policy, it was exactly at the ministerial meeting of the European higher education area, which at the time took place 2005 in Bergen in Norway. And I was deeply impressed by the speech of the then Prime Minister of Norway, the leader of the Norwegian Christian Democratic People's Party, Kjell Magne Bondevik, who said, and I quote, "Although religion seems to be part of the problem in many conflicts, we should take every opportunity to make religion a part of the solution. Cooperation between religious leaders and religious communities can be a powerful force for peace. Greater harmony between religions will not in itself resolve conflicts, but it can pave the way for peaceful, durable political solutions. It can foster greater understanding and cooperation within a country and between countries and peoples." And this idea expressed by Prime Minister Bondevik was not a totally new idea. Let us remember the early 90s, where also others have dreamed about giving Europe what they call the heart and the soul, by involving religion more into political discourse and being more closely with the people, the citizens, many of whom are believers and want to live and express their own religion. And there had been people who have warned in the early 90s, and I quote, "If in the next 10 years we haven't managed to give a soul to Europe, to give it spirituality and meaning, the game will be up." But ladies and gentlemen, let us be honest. Did this happen? Did Europe receive a heart and a soul by drawing on spiritual resources of the present and of the past? Is not sometimes the rhetoric about the cooperation with religious leaders and among them more lip service? Or may affirmations like this one and even Article 17 of the Lisbon Treaties risk to remain wishful thinking even today and in times in which a number of people would probably rather like Europe to have received heart and soul and thus be better able and equipped to cope with new and ever more also cultural challenges, where I would say you would never find a solution excluding religion from it. And during my work, I experienced that not programs and declaration changed the world. And I'm speaking, for example, about the Bologna process declarations of the ministerial meeting. It was not the declarations that brought along the European higher education area, but it was the enthusiasm of strong politicians, many of those parties which are united here in this day and in this meeting. And therefore, it's timely and very much appreciated the way how discussions during this meeting take place, and that you have asked representatives of different religions to address the question of the influence of religion in society today. And I'm especially grateful for the speakers who have spoken before me, so I don't have to repeat what they have all rightly and justly already said. The context of my own experience is working as a representative of the Catholic Church in education and in higher education policy in the context of the Council of Europe, of UNESCO, of the European higher education area, of which I had been also the co-chair for 1.5 years in 2014. And I had the chance to combine both experiences, working for a church, the Catholic Church and her institutions, which I continue to do, and on the other hand, working for international organizations for their goals and visions on behalf or seconded by the Holy See, so that I can somehow combine both sides in my own experience. But let me make a preliminary remark and an important and fundamental distinction with regard to the topic. I think there is a direct, explicit, and transparent influence of religion on one hand, and this is part of what we are doing here and what most of the speakers have talked about. But let us not forget that there may also be an indirect and not always clear, implicit influence of religion in society, which can be sometimes even without people themselves are aware. Let us think about strong reactions of people who feel themselves hurt because people mock or their religion or would speak in a way which they would see as phobia or hatred speech against them and against their religion. But I shall limit my consideration to the first, the explicit and transparent forms of cooperation and influence of religion in society. And I shall speak based on the experience in the field of education and higher education. When I remember working together with my colleagues representing countries or representing international organizations which per se didn't have to do with religion, and when I asked them what they were thinking about the contribution of the Catholic Church to our common goals and visions, They, for example, appreciated in a more technical way the influence and contribution of the Catholic Church. Sometimes when I ask them what they appreciate much, they mention the Catholic schools. And there are about 220,000 Catholic schools all over the world, with an actual enrollment now of 70 million students. Many of these schools caring for those children which would not have access to other quality education. And probably you would be surprised, but the majority of students in most countries of the world are not Catholics, not even Christians. You may add to these impressive figures that it's not only the Catholic Church, it's also other churches and other religions who do a marvelous job by organizing, running schools over the world. There wouldn't be education to all, which is even not now possible, but it would be far worse if we would take out all the schools organized and run by faith communities and religions. There is definitely an influence into politics of these schools, and a significant number of politicians all over the world have studied in Catholic and other faith-based schools and universities. I have also encountered that quite a lot of politicians in the Islamic world with whom we had very good cooperation mentioned that they themselves or members of their families have attended Catholic schools or Catholic universities. Yesterday, Georgetown University was mentioned, a place of dialogue and formation for many different religions. And they have also chaplaincies for different religions within their own university. Another contribution of the Catholic Church to the political discourses, which was typically appreciated, was the global view and the competence of many of the representatives of the Church, which were able to deal with more complex issues, especially those dealing with global affairs, especially in higher education. And at the same time, in most parts of the world, religions are quite strongly connected with the people at the grassroots and the local communities and communalities. And this double affiliation with the global and the local was also appreciated. But I would like to look beyond these rather immediate and technically useful activities and contributions of the Catholic Church and other religions to society. And I want to point to another dimension of influence and contribution, which I today would consider as very important. There is a certain complementarity between religion and politics. Both of them want to serve the development of human persons, society, and the common good. But let us not forget that this takes part with very different methods and respecting these differences. We know that troubles arise immediately if religious leaders act rather as politicians, or politicians would begin to confuse their party programs with religious doctrine and ideology. And I think some parts of the political crisis in our present democracies is that what we would call populist movements and parties use explicitly religious language, religious symbols, and abuse them in their rhetoric as they themselves would be messianic parties or would bring in paradise within this world, which is not possible, with far too easy solutions. But based on the recognition of the difference between politics and religion, I quite often experienced that as a representative of the Catholic Church, as it is true also for other representatives of religions, I could say in meetings what many others for political reasons could not say. And yet I can give you some easy examples. Some look rather banal, but sometimes it was just us to be able to propose one country for chairing where other countries for political reasons would never be able to propose this candidate, which was already agreed beforehand that it would be the best one. But sometimes political reasons make it not possible to say what everybody in the room thinks and is sure about. So it was that sometimes religious leaders and representatives of religious groups may think and speak out of the box and enlarging thus horizons, especially of reason, and in a complex world of many burning issues. Today's complex challenges, which can be a pandemic disease, a war, social tensions, societal disintegration, polarization, may have religious aspects and reasons or not. And we have to be careful not to immediately judge in that regard. But as Prime Minister Bondevik stated, religions have the potential to help to find solutions. Religious concepts may help finding solutions. I think in today's crisis, we have to consider this without speaking and outspeaking also words like sin, conversion, and forgiveness. We will not find solutions for what is going today. I was sometimes thinking what people in the last days of the Second World War were thinking. And they did not probably think it possible that one day reconciliation would take place. But let us think what happened in the early years after the Second World War, and when again many members of Christian parties sat together and overcome the big divisions and created an era of flourishment and success in Europe. Religions typically think beyond time and geographical borders, drawing from traditions and wisdom of the past, educating for the day after, promote solidarity with people who are not yet living. And religions may offer a different perception of time, for example, a long-term perspective. I mentioned that religious beliefs often have a better view for the global perspective. And probably the laicite and sometimes the resistance against religion and church is typical for Europe and may have to do with some religious wars in the past, like the 30 Years' War, or even the First World War, in which many Christian countries claimed to fight for the sake of God. But compared to Europe, according to my own experience, in other continents, people are more appreciative for religions. And let us not forget that people of different religions from countries outside Europe are coming to Europe. And they don't understand where here it is so difficult to live their religious belief also in public sphere. Today, many local congregations and communities have quite a high percentage of actively participating members with a migrant background. For the Catholic Church, this is true in many European countries now, where Filipinos, Vietnamese, Latin Americans, and Africans are the more active and joyful parts of living this religion. And this trend, I believe, is not only true for our religion, but also for other religions, and will be stronger in the years to come. Let me conclude alluding to the place where I'd hoped to be and hope to come to in future, Santiago de Compostela, and the image of a pilgrimage. I think it's all about walking a camino, a way, a process to start. And I said it is sometimes better to walk step by step in a modest way than wait for an easy and quick solution, as I waited for a plane that didn't come. And I want to finish with a quote of Pope Francis, who, among other principles for social and political life today, said the following: "Time is greater than space. This principle enables us to work slowly but surely, without being obsessed with immediate results. It helps us patiently to endure difficult and adverse situations or inevitable changes in our plans. It invites us to accept the tension between fullness and limitation and to give priority to time. What we need then is to give priority to actions which generate new processes in society and engage other persons and groups who can develop them to the point where they bear fruit in significant historical events, without anxiety, but with clear convictions and tenacy. At the end, the Pope asked the question, sometimes I wonder if there are people in today's world who are really concerned about generating processes of people building as opposed to obtaining immediate results which yield easy, quick, short-term political gains, but do not enhance human fullness. But this meeting has substantially nourished my hope and conviction that there are indeed such people and politicians. Thank you for listening.
Many thanks, Father Beschina, and I hope you are with us so that you can give some answers to the questions. Yeah, I'm sure about. Yeah, that's you mentioned just religion help find solution. Yeah, that's yes. But somehow, and this is already the next topic of dialogue. So. We have the honor to greet here the Mr. Professor Dr. Francisco Ramirez Puello, who is the Dean of the Faculty of the Theology, Comillas Pontifical University of Madrid. Mr. Professor Ramirez Puello, the floor is yours.
Buenas tardes.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the EPP for inviting me here. I'd like to thank them for inviting me to take part in this dialogue. I think it's not just the European People's Party that should be looking at this. I think it also means that religious leaders, professors, and all denominations have to ponder on this issue. So thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you very much for helping me to think about all of this. Pope Francis feels very strongly about dialogue. He's insisted that it is the fundamental core of evangelization. There is no evangelization without dialogue. And that is why the priests and bishops that met in Rome and that met him heard him say that this is very important. You have to train to engage in dialogue. You have to understand the others. The opposite would be to find refuge in clericalism and your own ideas and convictions without the ability to be self-critical and without analyzing your own beliefs. So this is an invitation to Catholics, and I think that other denominations should also pass on this message to those who are training in their seminaries. We have to be critical because without the logos, without the word, there is no dialogue. Without being self-critical, without calling into question our own beliefs, we cannot enter into genuine dialogue. I'm going to talk about 3 issues, and I'm going to try and be brief in order to respect my speaking time. First of all, I'd like to talk about the presence of religion in society. Yesterday, we were wondering, is Europe still Christian? And this was mentioned this morning as well, so I'm going to be saying a few days about the presence of religion in society. Secondly, I'll be talking about the role that political forces have. And then thirdly, I'll be talking about the role of institutions, especially in political and civic life. First of all, the presence of religion in society. It's obvious, and it's been said clearly, that Europe has a cultural tradition that is Christian or Judeo-Christian, and I don't think that we need to reiterate this, given that we're in Santiago. We've got so many cathedrals, philosophers, Christian universities. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. On the other hand, politics is practiced in a society where citizens have certain values, opinions, are sensitive to certain issues, have certain languages, beliefs, and ways of seeing the world, and therefore politicians need to be familiar with this sphere so that the political message reaches citizens and is understood. And it also needs to do so to make sure that its proposals and manifestos are adapted to what society expects and perceives as good and desirable. Now, to put it very simply, politicians need to know their customers. It's not just a matter of tailoring political discourse to the beliefs of society. It's about taking into account that the religious dimension is very relevant, explicitly or implicitly, in the lives of people. If in addition to religion we also talk about the spiritual dimension, and by this I mean when people strive to find the meaning of life, then it is something greater or higher than yourself. It is a way of dealing with pain, frustration, failure, or death. Then we can say that religion and spirituality is an intrinsic part of all human beings. It would have been quite easy to make this statement 40 years ago in Spain and maybe 100 years ago in Europe, but what do studies tell us at the moment about how present religion is in our societies? The first word that springs to mind is secularization. We've mentioned this before. The rates in Spain are similar to those in Europe, and so Spain and Europe have gone through a very intense process of secularization. In 2023, and the statistics I'm giving you refer to Spain, but you can extrapolate to the rest of Europe. So according to opinion polls, between 54% and 60% of those surveyed considered themselves to be religious. And in the case of Catholics, the rate was between 45 to 56%. So therefore, the figure of those who say they are atheists, agnostics, or indifferent would be around 39 to 45% in Spain. Now, when it comes to practicing one's religion, only 1 in 3 Catholics consider themselves to be a practicing Catholic. So the Catholic Church has access to 1 in 10 individuals. So 1 in 10 go to Mass regularly and listen to the speeches of their leaders. The rest do not go to Mass. Now, secularization is also noticed when you look at how relevant the people think that religion is in their daily lives. The average importance that Spaniards gave to religion in 2018 out of 10 was 4, while health almost 10, family almost 10, education 8, friends 8.3, and politics almost 6 out of 10. And when asked about how much religion influences your beliefs, or rather how much religious beliefs influence your daily lives, the response is also shockingly low. So very few people draw on religion when taking their decisions in their daily lives. However, about 70% of Spaniards are still willing to recognize that their fundamental values have Christian roots, even if they don't practice their religion. And so this is quite paradoxical, because Spaniards acknowledge the fact that the values that lead them to live or act in a certain way do have roots in religion, but at the same time they don't think religion is very relevant in their lives. I don't know, maybe you can explain this paradox. I do have an explanation. I don't know if it's the best. is that people in Spain and in Europe don't take values-based decisions. They take decisions on the basis of their interests and desires. The morale here is not based on principles. So what counts is what I feel like, what I want, and my immediate gratification. And this applies to everyone, believers, non-believers. So the level of values and the gap between values and decisions is huge in Spain, and I think in other countries as well. So this is a problem for politicians and religious leaders. We talk about values, but when people go to the polls, they don't decide on the basis of values, but they will vote for those who make life easy for them. Peter Berger talked about secularization and desecularization. So on the one hand, we have this religion indifference, we have increasing distance from the church, but at the same time, there is a whole process of desecularization, new forms of spirituality and beliefs. On the one hand, we have practices that vary and such as mindfulness, yoga, focusing, forest bathing, and please don't be offended because I've also practiced some of these. But what is striking is something that has emerged among young people, and young people are the future of our society. So I would talk about other types of religions, religious phenomena alien to what we might call Abrahamic religions. We're talking about beliefs that are alien to the spirit of modernity and European Enlightenment. If you ask young Spaniards whether they believe in God as a kind father who takes care of us and loves us, which is a Christian belief, but also has Jewish roots, and I'm sure that a Jew and maybe even a Muslim would agree with this. So a kind father who cares for us and wants human beings to live well. Only 27% of young Spaniards believe in this kind of God. So even less than the percentage of those who declare themselves as Catholics. And if you ask young people whether there is life after death, 45% of young people do believe in that. So a higher rate than those who say are they're believers. And many people believe in life after death and reincarnation. And 68% of young Spaniards say that they believe in karma. Please explain to me what karma is. 68% of young Spaniards, many of whom are atheists, others are agnostics or Catholic, believe in karma. I'm not going to bore you with other widespread practices such as Reiki, energy stones, shamanism. 26% of young Spaniards believe in astrology, palm reading, tarot cards, astrology, and so on. So many young Spaniards believe in these practices, but those traditional religions that are revealed, or whether based on a revelation, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, are of a certain type, but these new forms are not based on a revelation, but present themselves as scientific. So many of those who practice these beliefs believe they are scientific and expect to be treated, cured, and so on. So what can we say in light of these data? Religion is still relevant in our societies, but it's definitely different to the situation decades ago. Some talk about postmodern devotion. But at the same time, we live in a society where approximately half the population say they're non-believers, but whether they're believers or not, they're still seeking spirituality in spaces which are quite alien to the traditional institutions and Abrahamic religions. So there is a great liquidity or fluidity. So within a few hours, I can go from saying that I'm an atheist or agnostic to being a believer, or the other way around. I may have belonged to an institution for many years, but maybe something happened and I no longer believe in it. So religions aren't really rooted in people's convictions. Bauman talks about this postmodern liquidity that favors irrational beliefs that are not linked to looking at reason, truth, and science. Beliefs without community, beliefs without consistency. We talk about diffuse mysticism. So I believe in a lot of different things, but I can't put this all together in one coherent set. Pope Francis said that a culture that promotes subjective truths means that it will be difficult for citizens to want to be part of a common project that go beyond their personal beliefs. So if you look at religion as something subjective, individual, if you cannot be self-critical when it comes to your beliefs and look at other people's beliefs, then it becomes very difficult to engage in dialogue and to fight for peace and justice. Die Gedanken sind frei, proclaimed the German romantics and liberals of the 18th, 19th century. Yes, thoughts are free, but even though they're free, or even they are not harmless. From the belief that God is a kind father that takes care of everyone and protects human dignity, you will come up with certain beliefs. But if you believe in karma, as illustrated in our societies, you might believe that poor people are being punished for what they did in the past, and if you add reincarnation, you'll believe that the poor man maybe did something in his previous life and is being punished, and therefore you cannot get Christian compassion and charity. So when you have these religions, you have different political attitudes. Now, part two, but I'll be briefer. If we look at this, then I think both in political life and in religion, we have to involve those political parties that guarantee religious freedom. So the political forces have to be guarantors of religious freedom. We have Max Weber and his vision of modernity. He sought to reduce religion to the sphere of private values. But I would say that politics is about defending the public space, and the public space is also a religious space. Politics, laws, they have to make sure that there is freedom of religion in the public sphere. The state has to be a guarantor and a facilitator. They have to be able to safeguard the existence of religion in the public sphere. This is vital, because this has an impact on people's beliefs and on the political and civic behavior that stem from these beliefs. Those religious options that go for participation, the citizen participation, social compromise in society, I would say is also a task that falls on the shoulders of politicians. And those beliefs that want to destroy the public sphere, that all are about individualism, and that also encourage people not to go beyond their own experience, again, is something that has to be tackled by politicians. We're not trying to instate bans or crack down on this, but we need to promote those religious denominations that make public life easier. And let us not be surprised when we get populists and shamans who offer easy solutions to complex problems, because from religious shamanism it's easy to go to political shamanism. Now, part 3, I'll be even briefer. The role of religious institutions in political and civic life. I'm going to give you 3 examples. First of all, I'm sure you're all aware of the fact that religious institutions are involved in charity. It's not just the Catholic Church, it's also Protestant churches, of course, Jewish synagogues, and of course, Islam as well. They're all very much involved in charity. And this is what Spanish society holds in high esteem, even though they might have different feelings about religious institutions. 80% of Spaniards look favorably upon the charity work carried out by these institutions. And I think that this is a huge contribution to society. Now, education. This has been mentioned before. Primary and secondary education in Spain, or most of primary and secondary schools, are subsidized. What does that mean? That means that we help those who come from more working class backgrounds. Now, of course, there's a lot said about whether money is saved or not, but there is a third point. I am the dean of a theology faculty, and as a theologian, I would like to talk about the ethical and cultural reflection and dialogue. Religion, of course, makes a great contribution to anthropology and ethics. I'm going to give you 3 examples. First of all, the defense of justice, fair distribution of goods, protecting those in need, and not just through charities. Yesterday, was mention of the Church's doctrine. The Catholic Church I belong to believes in these social teachings of the Church is based on Jesus of Nazareth, the dignity of the person. So the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath, from Matthew 2:27. Power as a service. I'm here to serve and not to be served. Loving your enemy, universalism, and so on. All these values have Christian roots, European roots, and they're reflected in this social doctrine. I'll give you an example of this dialogue, and that's Pope Francis's Laudato Si. You've probably heard about this because there was a faith pavilion or stand in the climate change summit, which clearly shows that the Catholic Church is very much involved in the fight against climate change. I'll give you 2 more examples of how all of this is intermeshed. Now, over the next few years, I think that the churches will have to engage in dialogue with politicians to cover 2 areas. Bioethics. At the Comillas University, we have the oldest bioethics department in Spain, a lot of publications. I'd like to give you the example of the law on euthanasia, which was adopted recently in Spain. We were all involved, but the law adopted was not based on consensus. and they didn't even listen to the bioethics committee. There were professors from my university who were members, but the government didn't even listen to its own national bioethics committee. And this act or law is very problematic from a bioethics point of view. But I think that in these areas, listening to each other, engaging in dialogue is vital. Then there's technology and science. We have the issue of artificial intelligence. There are huge questions that relate to anthropology because this will have a huge impact on the world of work. There's ChatGPT, and at the Camillus University we have a Department of Science, Technology and Religion and a chair there because the decisions that we're going to take in this field will have a huge impact on our societies and economies in the coming decades. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Professor Ramirez Fuello. And I think you didn't finish there, you had to stop your speech. Yeah. And we are frequently so in the politics as well, but we have shorter time in the European Parliament, 1 minute, 1.5 minutes. I have 2 minutes. That's something. No, many thanks, and I think we have to, of course, continue. Yeah, but you and all the panelists, really a big thanks. Yeah, but before to give the floor to the audience, I have a mission impossible, really, to summarize and to give some orientation for you. And I only hope that you don't need it. But it's really clear that we have so many aspects of the religion in European society, and really we are, how we say, in this circle a little bit monolith. Yeah, the monolith. We accept the role of the religion in the society, and we know very well that what kind of powers they don't accept. They don't facing with this kind of, for us, the reality. And I would be able to raise different kind of questions, you know, from the begin to the end. You know, that's what's about the welfare, European welfare society. We get messages directly and indirectly. You don't need the God anymore, and we get it through different social media was mentioned, but through the education as well. How free is the education concerning the religious freedom? What kind of influence, direct and indirect influence, in the education forms? And of course, it was clearly mentioned, yeah, that it's really clear that the education, it's everywhere is present. But we are facing with a phenomenon, all the churches and all the religious places, it's a form of education. And if the people are educated in the church, in the community, why we need independent religious academies, for example? This is a little bit provocation, of course. And of course, it was clearly mentioned that by Father Beshina, religion helped to find a solution. Yes, and how? And of course, it's only to finishing and stopping me and not finishing. That's really how far can we go in the political praxis? Is it possible to translate it in the politic? In the politic in wide meaning, not only the party politic, not only the European politic or national politic, but how far can we go with this? But it's really clear. The church is one. Churches, religious institutions are main actors to represent different kind of religions, but it's more colorful the society in the actual European society, and it was quoted Olivier Roy, of course, the dechristianization. But dechristianization, it's one fact. But we are facing, or we are facing with the religiousation, or the spiritualization. And this is all the questions is in my mind, and I hope nobody get angry from this, and nobody is blocked to raise questions. We have the hope first, relatively short questions and short answers. Try to make a ping pong. Yeah, please, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Georgi, and thanks everybody, because there was really plenty of interesting ideas. I just pick up one, and this is about secularism, which was raised by Father Destivelle, about different perception and different understanding of secularism between West and East. I think it is the matter of fact, but my question is, what can we do in order to overcome this difference? What we can do as the politicians, and what church can do in order to overcome this different perception? Thank you.
Yes, we have, I think, different models of relationship between state and nation, between state and between religion and society, between religion and state, in the East and in the West. And I mentioned just one model, the Byzantine model of symphony of powers. Yes, while in the West it was it was a totally different model based on the construction also of the pontifical state and so on, and the quarrels between the secular and spiritual power. But I think a way to overcome this is precisely this kind of meetings. Yes, these are very useful, I think, to compare and to be able to acknowledge that we have different modes. I mentioned the question of the nationalization of churches in Eastern Europe. It's clear everywhere, in Ukraine, in Estonia, in a lot of countries born after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was this attempt of nationalization of this. It's something very positive, but on the other side, it raised also a lot of questions. And for us, for example, in the West, in France, it was strange to see the president of Ukraine sitting at the council establishing the new church in Ukraine. But on the other side, it's another model we have to understand this, and we have to also acknowledge that there are some differences and we can enrich each other. But the social teaching of the church is very interesting, and I think we should deepen perhaps a comparative approach of social teaching. There is now a new document of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, for example, regarding the relationship between state and church. There is also the model of the Anglican, with the model of the Catholic Church. I think reflection based on the social teachings, as it was mentioned yesterday, the differences between is very fruitful and useful.
Thanks a lot. One short remark only, just a second. It's not only about the Eastern Orthodox churches, but not only the churches, but it's very interesting inside Germany. If you see the differences, church-related issues in the eastern part of Germany and western part of Germany, both are Lutheran or Catholic or something like that. That means that it's not only about the orthodoxy. That it's really very, very important. So the next, please. Good. So Raviel, please. The floor is yours, please.
Quería preguntarle a usted, señor profesor Ramírez.
Well, Professor Ramirez, I wanted to ask you a question. I really enjoyed what you said. I thought that was wonderful. But what I didn't hear about is what young people are thinking at the moment. I mean, religious institutions represent knowledge that's been handed down for millennia. It's tradition, and this continuity is extremely important, I think. This overarching vision of human history and humanity. But does the same thing happen? Well, the same thing happens with Jewish communities, obviously, on a smaller scale. But the question is, could traditional institutions such as the church give space to young people so that they can hold discussions and think openly and compare the knowledge that's been handed down over millennia with modern options that are offered by society?
Ahora sí, ¿verdad? Bueno, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you for your comment. Your question contains something that I also think, which is about young people's beliefs. I mean, young people believe in reincarnation, tarot cards or whatever, and those who do believe those kinds of things aren't practicing Catholics or whatever. But the reality is that there are more believers in religion and people who practice religion, so Christians, Jews, Muslims, than people who believe in these other things. And I think that religious practice perhaps opens the door to other practices that exist. So, having recognized that, how can we take advantage of people's sincere search for meaning? I mean, people are always looking for something else. And many times religious groups are trying to offer something similar to a certain extent. I mean, there are all sorts of movements in Spain which are aimed at young people, and when they're successful, it's because they offer them a very individual, sensitive experience, a kind of spontaneous experience, very immediate, the kinds of things that they're looking for elsewhere. So what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is that there are searches that we could include. I mean, why not practice yoga, or at least experience those things, and we could perhaps include them. And secondly, there are some movements that are offering these kinds of things, religious movements, and they're offering it a kind of their own model of these things. But I think this leads us to a further point. I mean, we have to start with what they're offering to get what we're offering in there as well. Because if they get stuck on these kinds of superficial things, they lose the idea of community, of depth, of consistency. I mean, it's all a bit superficial, and so I think they need to be protagonists in these movements if they're going to genuinely become spiritual. I mean, that's another thing that we have to change. We shouldn't be thinking of ourselves, leaders, church members, we shouldn't be thinking of ourselves as leading this process. It's them who have to ask the questions, and they have to get organized, because that's how we can deepen participation. If it's top down, then it's not going to be successful. When it's young people who organize things, well, it might go better, it might go worse, but it's more sustainable. But what we do have to do is support them in what they're trying to do. Thank you.
Yes, many thanks. And the last chance to keep the audience together. Who has still questions? I recognized 3 questions. That we keep it, yeah. And we tried. If it's a short question, we keep it in the ping-pong style. It was until now it's successful. And after we have give the floor to each panelist for the final words. Marcella, floor is yours. Marcella Szymanski.
Thank you very much for this, and also I cannot let this finish this event without thanking deeply, in behalf of the persecuted Christians, the work of the EPP Group for Interreligious Dialogue and Cultural Dialogue. There has been a lot of work that we have managed to do together since 2011, when the first time I brought to Brussels the archbishops of Iraq. And since then, it has been a great source of not only of dialogue, but also of relief and consolation for the victims of persecution, which are often very much chased in the cruelest of manners. Every single day, as you know, because I come and tell him with the bishops of Nigeria or from the Iraq or from Pakistan or from other countries, there are lives of people who so strongly believe in God that they are willing to continue to live their lives in front of the barrel of a gun or of a machete, because that is so important for them. So when we discuss here at the European level or not, the role of religion in society, I can only think of them willing really to sacrifice themselves to do absolutely anything, but not abandon their faith or renege of their God. So I am very, very thankful to you for all the space that you have given them, and I look forward to continue working with you. Then we have been discussing here on topics that are related to inside the European Union and to outside the European Union, and this can be a little bit confusing for people who do not know what is the mandate of the European Union on matters of human rights, and particular religious freedom, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, which is still the competence of member states. However, the problem that I've been facing, because I do the advocacy for aid to the church in need, not only in the European Union, but also in Geneva and in Washington, is that this confusion exists all over the world, that people do not want to let others look into their own kitchen, and they like to say outside what is the situation over there. But both things are very important. As the editor of the Religious Freedom Report, this edition that I published on the 22nd of June really marks a terrible increase in violations of religious freedom inside what we call the West. So my question is, how do you think that this is going to change? It is necessary that it changes. We can put as many reports and maps with colors red and orange as we want. If the European Union, in particular the European Parliament, still refuses to look into matters of inside the European Union in a more solid matter, I don't know really where we're going to go. And this is a global problem, I'm telling you, because I go to all these different arenas. So please tell us what can you in your mandate and us as civil society can do in order to be more realistic in the approach of the effects of religion in society. Thank you.
Thank you. It's sorry, Macharis, for this. Who should give the answer? You're right. No. It's many thanks. No, thanks for the opportunity. I think it's going to change the matters. That was your question. And I think it's what we have in our capacity, what is limited. Of course, in this circle, we try to do everything, to do really for the freedom of religion. But it's absolutely clear that in the international diplomacy, especially in the European-based international diplomacy, it's not high-ranking enough, this kind of matters, this kind of issue. And we are fighting for it. That is all bilateral meetings with those countries. They are touched with this kind of issue. They don't accept the religious freedom, should be part of the normal debate. Like, for example, for the human rights. But this is the phenomenal. The religious freedom frequently is not part of the human rights in the international debates. It's a disaster. And of course, we have to see, and we faced with this phenomenon before, that some other part of the hemicycle, they don't want to confrontate with this. And we have to push really in the very manipulative way, in good meaning, the very manipulative way, the corner, that they accept it. We have the common experience, 2016, about the genocide in Iraq, the Christian persecution form, genocide in Iraq. And of course, we know this how difficult it was. And this is, and honestly, I don't like the general answers. It was mentioned, it's very dangerous. But we have to find in the European political arena with the ignorance. But openly, if you go to the others, nobody say, no, I am not in the favor of the religious freedom. Nobody, yeah, nobody. But in the practice, we know it, and this is the problem they don't care about. This is not an issue, yeah. And this is what we have to do it, and this is the part of the education. Of course, the religious freedom, we see this is a complexity, and for me, the practical atheism, it's not the academical wording, the practical atheism, yeah? But sometimes they bring the different kind of representative of different kind of religions very close together. From Muslims to Jewish and Christians. If you are confronted with the practical, this kind of ignorance, I would say, yeah? And this is a different experience. Yeah, but we are in the middle of the story. And thanks for your work that you are really every year consistently attacked the issues and documented the issues. And this is the base of our long year. This is a traditional cooperation, yeah? But not only the past, of the future as well. Thank you. So, okay, Milan, floor is yours. Sorry.
Gracias. Creo que ha sido muy interesante.
Thank you very much. I think that these debates have been extremely interesting. When I was listening to Professor Ramirez, I felt very worried about young people in Spain. The conclusions weren't very optimistic. On the basis of the figures you gave us, basically young people don't believe in values, or at least a great part of them doesn't. And that there is pragmatism, perhaps certain hedonism. It's about instant gratification, but the way they act isn't based on values like in the past. So do you think that this is a situation particular to Spain, or is it the case in other countries? Maybe we could also hear about the situation in France from Mr. Destivelle. So what is happening with young people in your countries? Are young people being more pragmatic, more hedonistic? Are they moving away, shifting away from values? Is there a lack of ethical commitment? Thank you.
Yo solamente digo un poquito porque la pregunta va.
Well, let me just briefly comment because the question was directed to someone else, perhaps. Now, if we talk about humanism, we are the children of Christian humanism from the 15th century. But humanism reduces everything to the practical level, to the lowest common denominator, as it were. So there aren't really values, everything. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but essentially things are reduced to desires, etc. But and decisions are taken in a sort of more practical, more concrete ambit. They don't really look to the long term, because but that doesn't fit, for example, young people's values on the environment. People think that's very important. So I think it's important to note that you often think that facts on the ground are different from what we actually say.
Just in one reflection, I think the idea of this sociologist and philosopher Olivier Roy is very interesting. I think the disconnection between religion and culture is la sainte ignorance, the holy ignorance, that there is a supermarket of different pieces of various faiths, and people are just picking up from these different elements, and so they can change. It's a liquid, as it was mentioned, culture, when you can pick up some. You don't need any rights, you don't need any culture, you need any language. So I think it's yes, this is something we have to be aware of, and it's something which can explain also perhaps more than the question of values, because you can also pick up some values here and there. But the fact that there is a disconnection between religion and culture.
Many thanks. It's one sentence only before to give the final question to José Luis Bazan, our friend. Yeah, we are in the pluralistic society, and all the religions have to find, this is a huge competition, and have to find their own voice. And I think it's for everybody, it's a huge challenge. Yeah, and especially touched by the young generation. Of course, they have a totally different kind of influence. And this kind of, historically, the monopoly of the communication of the churches, it's over. But it's very visible how difficult to find the new way of communication in the, I would just say, historical churches, yeah, or religions. Mr. Bazan, the floor is yours. I'm happy to see you here.
Happy to see you as well. I will formulate my question in Spanish because I have no chance usually to speak my mother tongue. Si me permiten, bueno,
First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for this opportunity, not only during the sessions, but also for our discussions on the sidelines, during the meals in the corridors. We all know that this isn't just something on the side. These discussions can be vital. Now, I'm going to ask my question and then explain the backdrop. Given that we have religious representatives here, and I'm also referring to those who are not just on the panel, but my question is the following. We have religious communities and churches. How can we avoid the temptation of religious supremacy? Let me explain. The fact that our theology can lead to us thinking that certain individuals from or certain religions are supreme, and I'm not just talking about spiritual supremacy, and that we have more rights than others. Yesterday, Jürgen Sørensen talked about Christianity and the fact that we have a guiding principle and what is in the Bible, you give to Caesar what is unto Caesar, and so on. There are different interpretations, religion and state, and maybe the state protects religion. But that is different in other parts of the world compared to Western Christianity. So religion regulates time and the state regulates human space. So what happens with those religions, those beliefs or religious interpretations that want to converge or unite power with authority, space and time, that when religious supremacy becomes political supremacy?
Of course, it's a very complex, very wise question, and I think it's very clear. I am honored to give the final word for everybody. Yeah, that is really, and this it's made possible to give an answer. Yeah, it was not targeted somebody. Yes.
Sí, en realidad era a todos, porque
it's actually to everyone, because each and every religion might have a certain internal mechanism to stop itself from falling into this trap of supremacy.
Ja, vielen Dank für die Frage.
Well, yes, thank you very much for the question, and that gives me the possibility to refer to a document that was mentioned yesterday as well, the one on human fraternity in the world. It's a document from Abu Dhabi, and it was issued by Ahmed Al-Tayeb, the Grand Imam of Egypt, and Pope Francis. And it dates back to February 2019 in Abu Dhabi. And one of the key terms or key phrases in the document, which I really recommend everyone reads, I mean the document as a whole, I mean, but the most important part, I think, relates to a phrase that talks about citizens' rights and the equality of all citizens in a state, regardless of their religion, skin color, etc. And that's a principle that sounds a bit banal perhaps to Western ears, but if you look around the world, it's not really banal at all. And I think that relates to the question of supremacy, because it's looked at in different ways. And one way of doing it is consciously or subconsciously to discriminate against the other. And so I think it's important to talk about equality between people without differentiating. And I think that would really be a key element which I think needs to be introduced into this discussion. And I think that's sort of a starting point which can then lead to further practical measures. Thank you for the question.
Yo les pongo, la respuesta sería...
The answer is education against ignorance. I'll give you a specific example. I teach biblical studies, and when I talk about St. Paul and the doctrine of justification by faith and the facts, and I try and spend a day talking about the role of the Torah in Judaism. I look at the values enshrined there, how it's experienced, how it's interpreted, what the Torah means to Jewish people. And then I try and explain St. Paul without disrespecting what I've talked about previously, and I think that in this way people are more tolerant, more willing to engage in dialogue and not think they're better than others. But of course there are centuries where Judaism had to be so that they don't think that Judaism had to be overcome and so on. So education is the key.
By Matuzov, please.
These days we face many enemies, the known and the unknown. The worst enemies of all is perhaps the enemy, it is the fear, it is the uncertainty, it is the ignorance. These are the worst enemies of ours. We could fight them internally and collectively. You know, in times of trouble, of crisis, and we see this you asked about France, a country I know very well, and we see this around the world, in these times of trouble and crisis. We see many youth that they want to return to their roots, understand themselves, talk about the Jews, why they are Jewish, what does it mean to be Jewish. One of the threats is the assimilation, and they really want to get involved to know what is as a European means to be Jewish, as a French in the culture and the tradition to be Jewish. And this is within ourselves. We could find the answers, and collectively we could find, and this dialogue really contributes, this work, this important work that you are doing, contributes to that, to enriching, to sharing, discovering, and finding solutions, but not just in theory, but also bringing to practice with acts of goodness and kindness. Let me conclude by quoting Maimonides, who was born in Cordoba 885 years ago. And he says, there will come a time when the face of earth will be filled with the knowledge of God, like the water filled the sea. And I think we are getting towards this area. Finally, George, thank you for your personal dedication, involvement, ambition, and bringing this together from already, 20 years ago, as in different capacities, and today when we could, and it's a real pleasure to be able to continue this work together, and I hope for many, many more years to come. Thank you, and thank you all.
Thank you, and I have the opportunities to come back to Father Beshina, What is your short reaction, please? The floor is yours. I think it's the answer it's going to give later on. Case, yeah, that's the Father. The floor is yours, yeah, the final verse, please.
Thank you. Well, since we are in a place of pilgrimage, I would like to elaborate a bit on this image of the pilgrimage and make the link with the journeying together. As you know, in Greek, journeying together is synodos, a synodal way, and Pope Francis, as you know, is very sensitive to this aspect of not only of the Christianity, but of all believers. They have to journey together. And I think we have journeyed together in these days. And we, in our dicastery, distinguish three kinds of dialogue. The dialogue of truth, on the theological dialogue, of philosophical dialogue, the dialogue of love, when the leaders meet together, but more important is the dialogue of life, what people are experiencing on the grassroots. And we need these three kinds of dialogue, of truth, of love, and of life. And the goal, the unity, because we are not only speaking between Christian or between believers, but with the whole humanity. The goal of our dialogue is the unity of the mankind, yes, of the whole cosmos even. And Christian unity is only one step, and the unity of all believers is only one step of the unity of the whole cosmos. We are on this journey of unity, and Pope Francis very often says that l'unità si fa camminando, cammin facendo. The unity comes on the way. It is not at the end of the way, but it is journeying together that we will receive this gift of unity. Thank you again for this invitation.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, dear guests, we finishing this panel. But it's not in Munich. Here, yeah. Yeah, we don't hear you. It's almost. No. Oh, somebody should. Oh, Father, it's difficult. I don't know. Oh, it's. Oh my God. I know who will be the next honorary guest or for meeting. No, the technicians are not on the top. Yeah, that is okay. That is, yeah. Okay. No, it's we have to finishing. It's my decision. I take the responsibility for it. Yeah. Sorry. Sorry. Thank you. So many thanks. So to find a conclusion from this panel is only one sentence. Somehow we have to continue, and I would like, it's not general, it's very concrete, the role of the education. We are really decision makers, we are stakeholders, everybody of us. They have their own responsibility. And we shouldn't outsource this kind of responsibility to the others. Father, maybe you are responsible for the Catholic issue, not me, you are in Rome. Or the other, that you are the professor, theologian, mother. You know, everybody in their own place, inclusive, of course, us as politicians, we have to do what we can do in our capacity. And I think that should be a culture. It's a culture between us. So we are end of this panel, and the next is nothing else. It's very important to get the closing remarks. And my friend, my co-chair, my co-fighter, Jan Olbrycht, I ask you, Jan, take the floor. And really, before, from my side, I would say really a big thanks for all the, really, without to be very concrete, to everybody to make possible this panel and this conference, especially for the interpreters. I think it was enjoyable for you as these kind of speculative topics as well, but I think it was a big challenge. But congratulations for the interpreters especially. Jan.
Yes, thank you, Georg. And of course, that we were thinking at the beginning how to make the meeting, which will be concerning about 25 years, and not to make it just ceremonial and just to show that this is 25 years. How to make it as always very concrete and important. So I think you are going back home with this impression, I think all of us, that this meeting was again a very good moment to stop a little bit for us politicians, to stop and to reflect. In the dialogue, what is absolutely necessary is to declare the lack of knowledge. I mean, we politicians, we are inviting the people from the churches, religious communities, just to show that we need, because we don't know. Because we as politicians, we need this kind of information. And we hope that you also don't know what we think. It means that this kind of dialogue is absolutely necessary. And of course, it shows how important it is in today's world, full of tensions and problems. And of course, this is also the way to avoid the lack of knowledge and ignorance, which in the political world is quite often the case. Also the ignorance. It's not about generally, but in political world. So I think this is, of course, a kind of declaration from our side that we as EPP, we would like to do everything to avoid it, to avoid this ignorance. And we are ready to learn from you and ready to share with you and trying to find a way how we can avoid it. So once again, we finished this meeting, the annual dialogue, the 25th. And let me just, Georg already started, but let me first thank our Spanish colleagues, and of course, Milamon, who is still with us, and I think for him, especially thanks. I would like to thank all the team who was preparing, and I think I can address to Andrea Lascava, but for all the team to work and to prepare the meeting, which is not very easy. It's not very close to Brussels. It's not very easy to get here and to leave from here. Some colleagues, they have problems to get and to leave. But anyway, this is the specificity. So once again, and I would like to thank all the guests who are coming to participate in the meeting, to share with us this experience. And I think that we have all this kind of feeling that we are among friends. I mean, the people who just, they like to meet each other, and because we can trust each other, and even if we don't agree on some things, we would like to continue this dialogue. I would say that at the end, the most efficient meeting is when the panelists are not bored. You know, this is important. You know, as very often the panelists, you know, and when you see the panelists, they are just sleeping and watching telephone or something, it means that the whole meeting is purely. I think that this meeting is completely contrary. It's extremely interesting and challenging and requires the attention. So, thank you, all of you. I think thanks my colleagues from the Parliament to be here, and we will continue the same work. Of course, tomorrow we will start preparation of next annual meeting, which will be after the elections, and we will see who will be in the Parliament. I hope that all the colleagues who will stand will be here. I hope that we will cooperate with our speakers. I think that we will have all the text which has been presented here, because they are extremely important. Extremely important. I think the text which has been presented here. So, and for all of you, have a good, safe way home, because this is the time of very, very complicated situation. Some of the airports are still closed, so maybe we will not start walking, but anyway, we will start to find the way. Once, Georg, thank you very much for your cooperation and co-chairing. Thank you very much. All the best, and we will see on the next meeting. Thank you.